Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a bi-weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 68, The Artful Archers, a portrait of Powell and Pressburger, which is quite an epic title for quite an epic duo, as we will see.
Yeah, they're probably not super well known in the mainstream of a film culture in terms of, just what the man on the street knows about, but they are heavily
American
influential.
film culture.
Yeah, they are heavily influential. They've probably influenced people that you have watched, like David Lean or Martin Scorsese, and we'll certainly talk about that throughout the episode today. But let's go back to the source and actually talk about the people who did it.
Yeah, so just to be specific as far as the title, we are talking today about a directing duo of Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger, who joined together at some point and created films under the title of The Archers. And Alex, give us a little bit of background on who the Archers were and how they came about.
Right, so the Archers were this directing duo that collaborated on over 24 films, actually not over, exactly 24 films, between 1939 and 1972, with a run of very influential films happening in the 1940s, mostly during World War II, where they just produced a whole bunch of rather large-scale films really quickly. It tended to be that these stories that they made were based on stories that Emeric Pressburger would come up with. Then both Powell and Pressburger would work on the script together. Powell ended up doing most of the directing, and Pressburger ended up doing most of the producing, although they would tend to just share all those credits to simplify it. And I don't know, I feel like it made their creative partnership easier to just go ahead and say, yes, we both wrote it, directed it, and produced it. That way you can cover each other's backs, so on and so forth. And we've already talked about on the podcast how nowadays you have to be an established duo in order to share directing credits. But one, this was the early 19th or 20th century, and two, this was in Britain. So, different time, different place.
Yeah.
They first collaborated on a film called The Spy in Black in 1939. After Emeric Pressburger immigrated from Hungary to Britain to work with the producer there, another immigrant named Alexander Korda, who had, at the time, been working on a string of films with Michael Powell. So that's how the two met, and they liked each other's style, and they decided to keep working together, and they just kept working together. The first film where they actually split the credit officially and used the term The Archers in the credits was One of Our Aircraft is Missing from 1942, which was actually edited by David Lean, which is going to come up later in this podcast. And conveniently, for us film nerds who like hard written facts that we can repeat to you and study and be fascinated ourselves, The Archers have a manifesto. So, this manifesto has 5 tenets, and it would describe the way how they would go about making a movie. Tenet 1. We owe allegiance to nobody except the financial interests which provide our money, and, to them, the sole responsibility of ensuring them a profit, not a loss. 2. Every single foot in our films is our own responsibility, and nobody else's. We refuse to be guided or coerced by any influence but our own judgment. 3. When we start work on a new idea, we must be a year ahead, not only of our competitors, but also of the times. A real film, from idea to universal release, takes a year, or more. 4. No artist believes in escapism, and we secretly believe that no audience does. We have proved, at any rate, that they will pay to see the truth, for other reasons than her nakedness. And tenet number 5, at any time, and particularly at the present, the self-respect of all collaborators from star to prop man is sustained or diminished by the theme and purpose of the film they are working on. So, as you can see, they had their own creative code, and they stuck to it throughout their careers. I also find it a little interesting that they said nobody believes in escapism, when I feel like a lot of their films toe that line between being real and being fantastical. Although I feel like they're the way they toe that line and dip their films into both sides of that pool kind of proves that you can have fantastical things without having completely escapist things. Is that a universal truth that I 100% agree with? No, but it is impressive to me that these two guys would have such a strong code about their film and just run with it for so long.
Yeah, and it's funny sometimes that that creative control that they wanted would cause issues in the within the industry. Like they have very specific ideas of how their colors and stuff like that should look, which is going to be a big part of our discussion today. And sometimes that would not go over well with the people that were processing the film because they were breaking the rules of Technicolor and stuff as Technicolor was coming up. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And the last thing we should mention is that just keeping it within the realm of filmmaking and editors. Eventually, Michael Powell was married to Thelma Schoonmaker at the near the end of his life, and she was the editor on Raging Bull and The Aviator, just a lot of really big name films, and so that's really interesting that there's that realm of influence that we're going to see that goes on and on after the golden years of these two filmmakers.
All right, so let's talk about the specific P&P, the Archers films that we're going to talk about today. The first of which being The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp from 1943. And if the title of this episode doesn't point it out, I really like long titles. So this one is already right up my alley.
It's a slightly misleading title, though.
Yeah, it's not actually about Colonel Blimp. And if you're sitting there going, is Colonel Blimp somebody who I should know? It feels like somebody I should know. Yes, it is a pop culture figure from the 1940s, I think, and a little bit later. Colonel Blimp was a cartoon strip in British newspapers featuring a bumbling old general that looked a whole heck of a lot like the Colonel Blimp in this film. Although we should say that P&P didn't base the movie off of that Colonel Blimp. It kind of became an idea that got incorporated into the movie, explaining why this bumbling old colonel is the way that he is. But the main character of The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp isn't even named Colonel Blimp. He just bears a striking resemblance to him. In fact, the idea for this movie is based on a line from their previous film, which I already mentioned, One of Our Aircraft is Missing, in which an older Army person is speaking to a younger Army person and just points out, you don't know what it's like to be old. And they didn't think much of that line, but while they were in the cutting room with their editor, future filmmaker David Lean, he pointed out that was a basis for an entire movie in and of itself. That should really be a thing. And so what did they do? They made it a thing. And of course, as we'll
leave it to David Lean to turn one philosophical line into a practically 3-hour movie.
Yeah, into a 3-hour movie. Yeah, and this is definitely the movie that is closest to Lean in terms of, lots of things.
Scope,
we'll talk
content,
about all those
everything.
things. Yeah, runtime, all that stuff. So we will get there, but we're not there yet, because what is our next film that we're talking about today, Jonathan?
So second, we'll be talking about A Matter of Life and Death from 1946. Yes, it does have life and death in the title, but it's a completely different movie, which covers a completely different subject that we'll talk about. And it doesn't really have a lot of attention. It's interesting. This movie, it feels like it kind of gets swept under the rug a little bit. Like
you could say it flies under the radar.
All right, Alex.
It's a plot joke. It's a plot joke.
Those references. If you go online to try and rent this film, it's actually incredibly difficult. It is on YouTube, but that's pretty much the only place that you can find it right now. But it's very good. It was a delightful little film that we watched, and we will be talking about that soon.
It's not even available on Filmstruck, which is just tragic because they have so much Powell and Pressburger content. it's like this film has just like vanished from existence, which is a shame because it's so good. Maybe it'll come back. Maybe we can start that hashtag.
I think it's in the Criterion Collection, so you may be able to buy a physical copy, but it's just really difficult to rent it online.
I understand. Yes. But in this day of having everything available online, it's so weird to not have something so good available online.
Yeah, you'd think.
Oh, well. On to our final film for the day, Black Narcissus from 1947. This one is, in terms of the rate at which Powell and Pressburger made films, I would say this one's pretty clear of their World War II era, even though it's 1947, but they made one like every year. So, yeah, definitely away from, the style or the content of the life and death of Colonel Blimp, but just as epic, just as adventurous, under 2 hours, which always seems odd to me whenever I watch it because it feels so big in scope and epicness, and we'll talk about that. But this one is pretty mentionable for its color use, and let's point out that it won 2 Oscars for its use of color, Best Color Cinematography and Best Color Production Design. And it's phenomenal, and there's a lot of details about the color use, the color planning that went into this film. Oddly, black is not one of the colors that's used predominantly in this film, even though it's in the title. Although we will hopefully explain the title at some point. But
It's used very specifically, but also very sparingly. So
yeah. I find that these guys are very good, or were very good, I guess, at making very fun, fantastical films that also had a lot of technique in them. So it's a perfect subject for us to talk about here on the Filmlings. And without a further ado, let's get into it.
The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp from 1943. Our first film today is the epic tale of the bumbling, successful, and somewhat sad life of Clive Wynne Candy. We open on a set of war games in which a group of upstart youthful soldiers throw rules out the window and embarrass an old Major General Wynne Candy. The rest of the film is an extended flashback that eventually brings us back to this beginning moment. The flashback takes place in episodes starting with a young Lieutenant Candy on leave from the Boer War in Berlin. There, he meets the love of his life, Edith Hunter. He also makes a lifelong friend in a German officer named Theo after dueling him. At the end of this episode, Edith is engaged to Theo, and Candy leaves to rejoin the army. The next episode takes place during the First World War. Now Brigadier General Candy meets a nurse who resembles Edith in France and marries her despite their huge age difference. He also finds his friend Theo in a POW camp after the war, who isn't as receptive to his friendship after fighting the British. The final episode catches up to the present. Candy has rejoined the army as part of the Home Guard during World War II, although he struggles to remain relevant and respected. He lives alone in a big house in London until he helps a now German refugee Theo get into the country. He eventually finds a Home Guard chauffeur for himself that bears a striking resemblance to his past loves, Edith and the nurse he met in France. And her connections to other Home Guard soldiers soon launch the chaos that kicked off the film to begin with.
All right, thank you, Jason. So this is a very large, very epic movie with a lot to it. Always feels a lot like classic literature to me whenever I watch it. But before we get into the meat of the movie, let's talk about some of the fun facts just kind of surrounding it. Starting off with the fact that this is a World War II movie, and Winston Churchill kind of didn't like it. He didn't like the idea of the British Army appearing to be infighting, or the general to be bumbling, or the young officers at the beginning of the movie to be so arrogant. It rubbed him the wrong way. Of course,
ironically, he kind of is the Colonel Blimp at the beginning of the movie.
A little bit. That might have had something to do with it.
He saw a little bit too much of himself in the portrayal.
Yeah. So there were a lot of problems getting this movie released. So it's one of those movies that has a kind of a slow roll to gaining popularity. People had to find it or bump into it. It was only released for a very short time in like one theater, and all of the proceeds from the screenings went to a charity for retired Navy officers. And in fact, the few people who did see it, a lot of them were really mad because the German officer Theo in the film is is portrayed fairly sympathetically, even though he's an anti-Nazi German. They did not like viewing Germans as good at the time that they were bombing London. So yeah. Anyway, eventually,
yeah. The thing that I kept thinking when I was watching this movie is that this movie, was released in 1943. This movie was made 2 years before the end of World War II, and in light of that, German camps haven't been liberated and stuff, so we don't know the total extent of the horrors of World War II. But still, a lot of the themes in this movie kind of become prescient when you think that it's before the war actually ended.
Yeah. It's especially the scene where Theo is talking about life in Germany, leading up to the Nazis taking over, and talking about his family being killed or dying in various ways, and it's
and his kids being brainwashed into the Nazi party and all that.
Yeah. It's it gets dark. It gets very, very dark. But yes, anyway, the public that did see it were not very happy with that. It would eventually be released in America, but not before being recut several times to a much shorter, probably less epic length, which is kind of tragic. But thankfully, due to the popularity of people like David Lean and Martin Scorsese and others who found the films of the Archers and really valued them and cherished them, we now have the restored version that is as close to the theatrical cut as we're probably going to get. It's available on Filmstruck right now. Not a sponsor, even though I feel like we send them a lot of business. I'm kidding.
Not yet a sponsor.
Not yet a sponsor. Maybe one day if we're lucky. Anyway. So yes, it's come back into popularity, especially in the film nerd circles. Us folks who really like art house cinema or classical cinema or cinema with a lot of technical spin and expertise on it. And it's very it's got all of those things. It's got a very specific use of color, and probably not as precise as Black Narcissus when we get there, but it's very good at controlling its color throughout its three different stages of telling. The first flashback to Lieutenant Candy's time in Germany is all full of reds and golds and bright colors, and then the second flashback to World War I has a lot more muted tones, especially when they're in the war and it's all dark and gloomy and blue. And then the final one, detailing the run up to the part of the film that kicks off the story, set in quote unquote modern times, at least contemporary times for the film, is all full of greens and khakis. It's very martial. It very much kind of communicates the uniforms that the Home Guard uses, and that's kind of the emphasis. Still war times, but not as gloomy as World War I.
Yeah, and the whole structure of the film, like we were saying, it feels very Leanian, like David Lean, kind of like we've already talked about with Dr. Zhivago, where we saw this portion of his life in episodes as we go through, and it's backdropped with war turmoil and different political upheavals and stuff like that. But again, we only think that because we've already talked about David Lean. We're more familiar with them because Lean's films are a little bit more contemporary, but he is influenced by Powell and Pressburger. So a lot of this stuff, a lot of the things that we talked about in the David Lean episode, his use of colors, his use of editing, his epic story structure, is kind of originating with these films and these filmmakers that he was so close to and that he worked for and that mentored him as he's coming up.
Yeah, worked directly with on two different films. He cut. We already mentioned one of our aircraft is missing for the Archers, and he also cut the 49th parallel for the Archers.
And also, just the big character, the scope of the character study. The great thing about the film is that we start off with this basically caricature of Colonel Blimp. He's kind of ambushed by these soldiers, and he's like got this really over the top reaction, and he looks silly with his baldness and his mustache.
The mustache is a plot point. It makes me so happy.
I know. I was so surprised about that. He's like, you make fun of my mustache, but you don't know why I grew it. And I'm like, wow, is there like a reason to grow a mustache? I thought it was just like a old British person thing. But then you get into the backstory. So I really love this film as like an example of taking what would otherwise be just like a quirky secondary character or supporting character and fleshing them out, like completely going through his whole life and not his death. That's where the deceptionness of the title comes from, because we don't actually see him die.
Yeah, he doesn't die.
But we go through a huge chunk of his life, and we get to understand why he is the way that he is, and we sympathize with him so much. And like you mentioned in your notes today, Alex, the film is bookended with this Rashomon kind of a thing, where we start off with the soldiers coming in and flipping this war game on its head that all these older British officers have designed, including Colonel Blimp. And then at the end, we know who Colonel Blimp is, and now we feel way worse for him. Before, he was just like, oh man, these young guys got the jump on this older guy, and by the end we're like, oh man, he had planned that out so specifically, and it like that whole drill was basically a personification of his ideals. And so now we feel really bad about him for getting bested, because one of the themes that go through the film is this idea of fighting fair and this honor in war that Colonel Blimp starts with, and he has this ideal of no matter how ugly the enemy's tactics get, we fight clean, we do it by the rules and all that kind of thing. And by the end of the film, we realize that at some point, you have to match the enemy. To beat an unreasonable enemy, you have to use unreasonable means. And that's what I'm saying when I talk about how prescient the film feels. Given the way that World War II had to end, that's exactly what the film is struggling with 2 years before America ends up dropping the bomb.
Yeah, which goes right back to the Archer Manifesto about them wanting to be ahead of the times. Like literally down to like the point where they're planning, they're like, okay, it's going to take us at least a year to make this. So like the idea they're cooking up isn't just a year ahead of the times, it's like 2 years ahead of the times.
Oh yeah.
So that by the time it releases, it's only 1 year ahead of the times, which is just nuts. And let me just point out that technically that still makes it of the times. If you're making a comment on the times about where it's going to go, it's of the times, but it is still an impressive amount of forward-thinking that goes into the issues here.
Right, because who else is going to make a war film about having to take extreme measures? Like, the only way that they could have been more like ahead of the game is to literally have the film end with an atomic bomb drop or something like that. Some kind of like mass
Dr. Strangelove?
Weapon of mass destruction. Yeah, but Dr. Strangelove before the atomic bomb was dropped.
Mm-hmm. Before they even knew they had to learn how to love the bomb.
Right, exactly.
There we go. Anyway. Yeah, no, but I do love how unique the characters are, how nuanced they are. This entire film is both epic and telling of the you essentially get the entirety of conflicting history of the first half of the 20th century through this film.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, this is mostly just a very detailed, in-depth character study of a rather tragic figure who can never quite got what he loved. Although thankfully the person he loves keeps reincarnating in the form of Deborah Kerr.
Yeah.
So in that instance, good for him. But he keeps losing her one way or the other. But each plot point is more complex than you would expect it to be. Even going back to the mustache, it's not just like an old military scar that he's covering up with the mustache in the sense that he got it in a battle or he was tortured to get it. like it's a deep personal scar that he has earned in that duel with Teo, that he didn't even know he was earning at the time that he received the scar. But that scar is the loss of his first chance at love with a character played by Deborah Kerr. That he didn't even know at the time that he was getting it. And that was the point. He didn't even know until it was too late because he was too busy essentially bumbling about, just being him. Also, quick fun fact, the German woman who is hanging out with Teo at the start of their stay in the hospital in that first section of flashback, like almost the full first half of the movie, or first hour of the movie, it's a 3-hour movie, is actually played by Roger Liversee's wife. And Roger Liversee is the man who plays Colonel Blimp. So, yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, interesting
brings
scene.
Another dimension.
Not the only interesting set of relationships that's happening behind the scenes that we'll talk about today. This is the less dramatic of the two.
But the last movie that I want to bring up in relationship to this movie is Citizen Kane. Because we've talked about it before, and anytime you bring up Citizen Kane, you get cinephile brownie points. But this film kind of feels like that. That's another movie that we follow a person's entire life in segments, in little stages, and we get to see... in Citizen Kane, it's much more tragic. In Colonel Blimp, there are tragic elements to it, but it's more drama because it's not any kind of moral failing or relationship destruction that's driving his life. He's actually usually the one in the right in all these situations, or just slightly off base, but not actively ruining people's lives. But it does have that same kind of scope and kind of a structure, even to the point of the flashback. And also, it's interesting to watch the just the makeup job in this movie is amazing, especially in color and nowadays in HD. It holds up really well because we see him in a lot of different phases of life.
Oh man, I would love to see this movie on a big screen.
I don't know if he actually like gained weight and everything or not, but
okay, yeah, here's something we should talk about. We should talk about that opening transition. Okay, so we get through this opening scene where we've already mentioned it, but it's the one where Colonel Blimp has issued the war games. Yeah. The younger soldiers storm his Turkish bath and turn him over. He ends up fighting with one of them in the pool. And as he comes out of the pool, he's young Colonel Blimp. And I keep calling him Colonel Blimp. He's not Colonel Blimp. He's Colonel Candy. I don't... anyway, it's the name of the film. But he comes out of the pool as young Colonel Candy. And I can't see a cut. I don't see a cut. So I'm thinking that they literally had prosthetics on him. You can definitely see the ones on his head, by the way, like the skull cap shows, which is just a side effect of still figuring out how to make up blend with Technicolor. That's an art. Anyway.
Yeah, Kane had it a little bit easier in black and white.
Yeah.
Not to mention they had like a world-class team of theater makeup artists.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're right. This is incredibly Canadian. They start off with old guy and go back. Oh man.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's just really sinking in right now. I hope it's sinking in for all of you guys at home. Anyway, but I don't see a cut in that transition. It looks like he had, so not just his hair prosthetic, but some face prosthetics too, to make him look older. Probably some washable makeup to take off, like bags under his eyes. And then...
the mustache. What about the mustache?
Yeah, well, the mustache definitely came off, but that one's pretty, like, fake mustache coming off, that's easy. And I mean, also, like, it's clearly a fake mustache, but... I'm just shocked, like, does he have a full, like, fat suit prosthetic going on? Because when they first storm him in the bath, he's taking a sauna. He just has shorts on.
Yeah, you could totally see his whole physique.
Yeah, and then...
that did not look like a fat suit.
No, it just looked like he was older and he had let himself go, is what it looked like. And then he comes out of the pool, and he's young Roger Liversee, who is fairly in shape. Like,
Oh yeah, and we're gonna see him in the next movie too. And he's like he's very young man still.
yeah, no, it's an impressive transition, and this is still early Technicolor, so the color use is still very, very strong. It's got a bit of a different feel than later Technicolor that we know and love from like the 60s, from something like, or the 60s or even the 70s, something like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The colors almost seem like a little too real in this film, but it's just impressive. It's just really impressive.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just gushing right now.
Nope, that's fine. These are beautiful films that there's a lot to gush about and to admire in them. So before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about the secondary theme in the film. I feel like the two kind of competing parts of the film are Candy's kind of staunch, clean fighting, like his clear ideas on how war should be engaged. But the second part is the more tragic part of his life, which is the fact that he meets this woman and doesn't realize that he loves her until she becomes engaged to who is now his best friend, Teo. And then the subsequent kind of cycle that it puts him in of trying to find the same woman. And for a while, he has a happy marriage with a woman who is very similar to her. And then he finds a housekeeper who is very similar to her, or not a housekeeper, but for lack of a better word. And this is definitely the most tragic part of the film, and there's nothing like sinister about it. We've seen similar ideas like this in Vertigo, where he tries to turn the woman into the woman that he loved, not realizing that it actually is her, and just kind of totally emotionally destroying her and himself in the process. It's much more kind of innocent than that, and there's actually interesting elements to it where his life with his wife, who looks a lot like the original woman that he was in love with, seems to be much happier than the life that Teo ends up having with his marriage to the actual woman that Candy's in love with, where their children grow up to be Nazis and she dies and he's left all alone.
Man, you know that song, Jonathan, Mamas, Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys? The real song should be Mamas, Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Nazis. Like, for real, don't.
Yeah.
It's bad.
A song for all ages.
If only it wasn't.
Yeah, I know, right? But it's this interesting idea that is actually going to kind of show up throughout the rest of these films, which is that there's one person that the character falls in love with and can't really move on. I think I put in my notes this week that if the main characters in all three of these movies believed that there were other fish in the sea, then they would have a lot less problems. Oh
my gosh, you're right. I didn't even think about that.
I'm telling you. And we'll talk about it more with each of the other films. But again, it's portrayed much more innocently here. It's not like a really like sinister theme that's going on where he like has this weird obsession with this one woman. I guess for to kind of tame it down, you could say he has a type. But there's one shot that really kind of drives the whole theme home. It's whenever he doesn't have a relationship or is thinking way too much about the original woman, which I'm going to look up her name right now so I stop saying woman, Edith Hunter. Whenever he's thinking too much about Edith Hunter, for some reason he hunts a lot, and he fills this one specific room in his house with all of these trophies, these taxidermized busts of all the animals that he's killed.
He can catch a lion, but he can't catch the woman he wants.
Right. And then at the end, after his wife has died, he hangs her portrait in that room with all the other busts of his trophies. He hangs her in his trophy room, which is, it's a really kind of sad, and he brings Teo in there and shows him the first time that Teo sees the wife that is exactly like his wife. And it's this really complicated and interesting dynamic. And the other interesting part of the dynamic is that him and Teo, like, this never is an issue in their friendship. Like, as much as
which is so weird and like weirdly refreshing for a movie from 1943. Yeah. I'm like, hey, good for you guys. Like, yeah, you're mature adults about this.
They have one of the most healthiest movie friendships I've ever seen. Even though they have this
against each other, and they're still buddies.
Right. Right.
It's so impressive.
And I mean, it's kind of set up from the beginning because they have this duel, but Teo is chosen basically by lots from the other German officers to engage in the duel with Candy, and they tell him that he didn't even want to do this duel. On principle, he doesn't like duels. And so they kind of both are starting from this place of kind of respecting each of their attitudes about war. Neither of them like war.
Although I want to bring this up. Does Candy like duels? Because he also kind of heavily implied before the duel that he didn't know how to fence. He didn't know what he was doing with the sword.
Right.
And then later we move outside while the duel's going on. You really don't get to see most of it.
That was really annoying to me, by the way.
And his buddy, who's an ambassador to Germany at the time, is like, "What are you talking about? Why are you worried? Like, Candy was the fencing champion at our school."
I missed that line. Yeah.
And clearly, because he makes
some little quip about I know which end to hold or whatever.
Yeah. And just based off of the fact that he got as good as he gave, I'm guessing Teo is a bit better than he was led on as well. I'm guessing there was some politicking in the lead up to that duel that masked how good each of the competitors was.
Yeah. But they're both coming from this place of being good at what they do, like knowing how to engage in combat and war, like combat being kind of simile for war in large, but neither of them are totally. And Candy, he seemed a little bit more fiery about it, but it starts them off on this friendship that lasts through two of the most devastating wars, especially between the British and the Germans. So yeah, I don't know. Their relationship is great. The relationship that Candy has with women, specifically women that look like his original love, Edith Hunter, is kind of weird, but not weird in a really like Greek tragedy kind of a way.
He doesn't become a serial killer, at least.
Right.
That
so
we
there's
know.
That.
Well, actually, is he a serial? Do you consider somebody who hunts that much? Would they be a serial killer? Actually, that's a totally different debate. Let's not have that one.
That's a conversation for another day when we talk about PETA. I don't know. Let's move on, though, to A Matter of Life and Death.
Yes.
A Matter of Life and Death from 1946. Towards the tail end of World War II, a plane crashes, and squadron leader Peter Carter was supposed to die in that crash, but he doesn't. He wakes up on the beach, alive, and soon finds the American radio operator who was on the line with him during the plane crash. Her name is June, and the two quickly fall in love. During a date with June, time stops, and Peter is the only one who knows it. Conductor 71, a French aristocrat executed during the Revolution, the head-chopping one, appears and explains that he was sent from the afterlife to retrieve Peter because he was originally responsible for taking Peter to the other world when he crashed. But since Conductor 71 messed up, Peter has fallen in love, giving him extenuating circumstances on which to contest his death. June brings Peter to her doctor friend, Reeves, who diagnoses Peter's visions as a brain injury. Meanwhile, Peter struggles to select anyone who's ever lived and died to plead his case before a jury in the other world. Then the night Peter is to be operated on, Reeves crashes his motorcycle and dies. Now Reeves can act as Peter's counsel and must contest the case for Peter's right to live now that he's in love. They're up against the American revolutionary Abraham Farland, who hates the British, pleading against Peter. Who will win the trial in the other world? The side for love or the side for natural law?
All right, Alex, it is such a wonderful life. We both had the same
see that
thought when
galaxy
we
over
started
there?
this movie.
Yeah, I see it, Clarence.
Exactly. We both had the exact same thought when we started this movie. And it's interesting to note that this movie comes out in the same year as It's a Wonderful Life.
Really?
And we open on...
It's 1946?
Yeah, they're both 1946. So A Matter of Life and Death opens with the shot of the night sky and stars. And is there a narrator talking about the stars?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a narrator talking about the stars. And we kind of like do this zoom, like seeing how grand the universe is. And then we end up at Earth. And then the whole the plot begins. But it was such an interesting thing that for a nice little like sort of paranormal type of a story about how good one person's life is and you know, this kind of cheating death scenario, they open in a very similar way.
Right. And then they spend the entire film like having influence from the afterlife, having a guardian angel of sorts.
Yeah.
One's much more legalistic.
Literally talking
than
about
the
how
other.
wings, like what kind of wings you have when you die.
Yeah, like they literally are like handing when you see the I think they refer to it as the other world in the film.
Yeah, they call it the other world, not heaven.
Yeah, it's like heavily implied. It's like it's heaven, but like it's not our word for it. We just call it the
It's
other
interesting
world.
that such a like generic movie about death, they kind of actually allude to hell too, but just like for one line and then they're just like forget about it.
Yeah. But yeah, they're literally handing out wings when these pilots are crashing and showing up in the other world. Which it should be pointed out, kind of a commentary on, you know, the end of the World War there. I think this movie still takes place during it. Yeah, it would have to, right? Like he is literally shot down by a German plane at the start of by a German anti-aircraft guns, I think, at the start of the film. You know,
yeah, but the specifics of the war time period are much less important in this movie.
Yeah. It feels like strangely like almost fun and fantastical to see all these like smiling soldiers and Air Force people and Navy people showing up in the other world.
Died.
And until you stop and think, because I don't really feel it when I'm watching the movie, but you stop and think, you're like, oh yeah, shit, they all died.
Yeah, like that was probably just one plane that crashed and they all died at the same time, and now they're all coming in like frat boys going into their house.
A weird analogy, but yes, they're all very excited, super excited.
Can you contest it?
Very very happy to see wings and to see the attractive Clarks that they have in the other world, which for all of our fellow Americans, apparently British people called Clarks. I don't know why, but they do.
Yeah, I actually thought he was saying clocks for a while. I was like, what?
Yeah, it took me a very long time to figure it out. In more longer than I'm happier about. But we should also point out this movie shares a lot in common with another fantastical film about an other world of sorts, and that's Wizard of Oz. Except they do the color thing in reverse. The real world is colorful, and the other world, the one you go to when you die, is black and white, which is also the world. And I'm curious, Jonathan, why do you think they did it that way?
There could be many reasons. I did not look up any, but you know,
I don't have a set reason. I couldn't find any set reason. I was just
right. There could. I mean, first of all, you're creating a distinction, so that's kind of an easy way. It would probably be considered kind of a cliche way now. It might be interesting though, since we don't see a lot of black and white use, especially not black and white mixed with color use anymore.
If the rest of the movie was good enough, you could probably earn it.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, it could be a logistical thing. Like if they only had so much money for color stock, they're like, okay, well, we'll split the movie in half and only shoot half of it in color and stuff like that. So I don't know. There could be many reasons. Or maybe it's because the people like our antagonist later in the film kind of sees things in a very black and white way.
Yeah.
And have to have to get out of that thought process.
So the first idea I had on it was that, yes, that the other world it ends up being very legalistic. They literally, like, the climax of the movie is a trial. I love that the fantasy world they go to, like, they're just like, oh yeah, let's have a trial. Like, it's a really interesting trial, but also maybe one of the most boring concepts that they could have ran with. They just end up making it very interesting because they're Powell and Pressburger.
Yeah, and it's legalistic. More of a philosophical trial than a legal trial.
Yeah, it's very, very black and white. It either is or isn't. But two, I think this one's probably more important. The desirable world in this film is not the other world. The other world's appealing. It's a comfort to those who are dying in the war. But it's not the appealing world. The appealing world is the one full of color, the one full of possibility, the one full of
potential,
of love. Full of, that's where you see all the flowers. I mean, even our dandy operator 71 there, he gets his flower that he keeps throughout the film from the real world, not from the other world, and keeps it with him. And also,
he gets the little meta joke where when he comes down to get our guy, man, I'm forgetting all the names. When he comes down to get Peter, he literally stops and looks at the camera and goes, "One is starved for Technicolor up there." So, like, the one time that in any of these movies we're breaking the fourth wall, but this one is just the right amount of fantastical and quirky to be able to pull it off.
Yeah, and it does make sense because he's in the other world. Like, you could assume
he
some
kind of
sort
transcends that boundary
from the people who are coming from the other world. And I do love that the worlds interact in a way. Like, we see the black and white bleeding into the color, and the color bleeding into the black and white, vice versa.
Especially at the end.
Yeah, especially
when they're literally touching.
With the escalator scene. Oh man, that escalator. Can I drop the escalator fact real quick before we get too deep?
Yeah, let's do it, because I did not know this.
Okay, so the escalator that they build for this film is ginormous.
So wait, to preface, in the movie, when the French guy is trying to take Peter back up to the other world, they sit on this huge escalator that transcends like Earth and space and goes literally up into the stars. And then at the end of the trial, they come down to Earth to finish and talk with the girl and all that. And so they're on this huge escalator, and it's gigantic, but it's all like process shot on green screen with our starry sky that we saw at the beginning and all that. So it's like a huge set piece part of the movie, and this is how they did it.
Yes, so the project to build this escalator was codenamed Operation Ethel, and eventually the escalator was just referred to as Ethel, which is, I don't know, it feels very British to name an escalator Ethel. I don't know what about that feels British to me, but it it seems appropriate, it seems fitting. These are two very British directors, and we'll talk about that here in a second because that's important. But Operation Ethel took 3 months to build this one set piece that we maybe get like 10 minutes of screen time out of.
2 or 3 shots total.
Not a whole lot. I mean, it's really nice set pieces. Probably, you always probably want to leave your audience wanting more. But 3 months to build, it weighed 100, or no, it didn't weigh. Sorry, that's a British unit of currency. Calculating for inflation, in modern pounds, it cost 119,000 pounds, which is like probably close to $150,000 to build, which is, wow, that's a lot to spend on a set. And at the time, it even involved the London Passenger Transport Board. And I don't know what that is, but it sounds like a very official municipal body in London. So, yeah. I don't know what they did with it afterwards. They probably destroyed it, but damn, that's a big escalator you got there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is like such a huge set piece and it was so expensive, but a lot of the scenes in this movie feel like very small in the set design and everything. Like, you can tell that practically every single scene was shot in a soundstage with a certain amount of space, but they've done it up with all these fake trees and matte paintings of skies, which we haven't even gotten into the matte paintings yet. You've got the psych going on for the trial scene with all these like dramatic light rays, almost German expressionistic. And so it's this movie is a really good example of Powell and Pressburger using their artistic flair to create a world that feels bigger than maybe what they had the resources for. And I don't know. I know they were established at this point, so I don't know how much their budget was, but it was just interesting to see these scenes that I could tell are not using a whole lot. They're not shot on location or anything, but the way that the color and the sets and everything are built, they just feel grand and theatrical and magical.
All right, so let's circle back around to the fact that the first part of this very long titled episode is called The Artful Archers, and talk about the art in this film, because there definitely is some, including some heavy referential things. And before people referenced film, what did they reference, Jonathan? And still reference theater. The answer is theater. Yes, so there is a very interesting scene in this movie where Peter is first meeting the doctor played by Roger Livesey, who is analyzing him and trying to figure out what's up with his brain. But they're meeting in some kind of recreation room where some kind of military organization is putting on a play for the radio operators and airmen who are stationed there, and they're all trying to learn Shakespearean lines and stuff like that. There's a bunch of Americans trying to do it with British accents and failing terribly. There's a girl posing to be put into a costume, and these are all incorporated into parts of the scene that are, important plot-wise to kind of move the scene along. But also, they kind of revolve around this idea of art and philosophy that kind of are very, very present throughout the movie, which I think connects deeper to this idea of beauty in the real world, whether it be the beauty of love, which is apparent, and I've seen so many times in movies that kind of roll my eyes at it, but it works very well in this movie. To the flower garden that the Conductor 71 first appears to Peter in and freezes time in, which is a very cool effect. It's all through this movie. Where did you spot it, Jonathan?
Yeah, so aside from them quoting Midsummer Night's Dream and sections of Midsummer Night's Dream where they're rehearsing the play within the play, which I won't. There might be a case to be made that we're talking about life as a rehearsal for the other world, but I won't get into that. But they also, they have camera obscura in this movie, which is something that does not show up in a lot of movies, even though it's like the history of film, where they go to, or the first time that we see the doctor, he's got this camera obscura, I guess like on his house, and it's
he's
projecting,
looking down omnisciently, Jonathan.
Yeah, he's projecting it onto a table and literally like picture-in-picture inset of him looking over the whole town like this guardian angel.
I feel like it's foreshadowing. Do you think it's foreshadowing? I feel like it's foreshadowing.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, not even foreshadowing. We've already been to the other world and seen them come down, so I don't know. It's just more thematic
when the doctor
layering.
Is in the other world, looking over.
That's true
and protecting,
too. Yeah.
His friend, the American woman whose name I can't remember, and Peter, the British airman whose name I remember because you mentioned it like 10 minutes ago, Jonathan.
Right.
Sometimes the details of the characters are much more important than their names, and they stick in your head better. But yeah, no, I feel like it's foreshadowing that point, or at least showing that he feels omniscient and is willing to contend with other people who feel omniscient, as he ends up doing. And he certainly starts off that way, even though he doesn't know it. He is fighting against that diagnosis of Peter thinking that it really is this other world, and he's like, nah, this guy's just experiencing hallucinations,
right,
and is fighting for it to be treated medically.
Yeah, and then keeping with the different artistic references, at the end of the movie, we end on a quote from Sir Walter Scott about love, and that's practically the last thing. And it's a pretty extended quote too, but it's kind of funny because the judge says it, and he's like, as Sir Walter Scott is always saying, because he's in the afterlife, so he could just keep quoting his own works at people. But yeah, there's just a lot of that influence of all these different artistic mediums into this film, which is appropriate for a directing duo that is known for how artistic and precisely stylized all of their shots and all of their films are. And it bleeds in, like you were saying, Alex, to some of the philosophical debates. And like this whole movie hinges on this one philosophical debate about, should he be allowed to live, or should he have to follow the laws of the universe and die like he was supposed to? And it's really interesting. Like you were saying, sometimes it feels a little bit cheesy because it kind of hinges on this idea of like love conquers everything, and they fall in love so fast that it's a little bit hard to get behind it right away.
Which is also kind of the point.
Yeah, but it's executed so well that you kind of just run with it.
Yeah. And I also love that it's a movie that's playing with the idea that is playing with the idea of contrived circumstances, like which is like an arch sin when you're writing, but in this movie it becomes a major plot point, to the point where the fact that they fall in love so fast, the fact that he washes up on the exact right beach, like those are all critical plot points to the movie working, and the fact that they seem rather convenient is brought up by the films and a argument about it.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's got this kind of melodramatic air about it. Like we're presenting something in a much more dramatic way than it actually needs to be presented in order to make the case that love is the most important thing on earth. But it's kind of got that, it's got a little bit of that fantastical element set in a real world environment and to make a point. And that's kind of something, this wouldn't really qualify as sci-fi, but it kind of hits on a lot of things that certain other things do. And as I always like to bring up, The Twilight Zone has several episodes that are very similar in subject to this film, like one for the Angels about this traveling salesman who has to argue with death for the life of this little girl. And The Obsolete Man, where a man has to argue for his own importance in life and why he should not be taken out of the social equation. So themes like this and this kind of fantastical environment that they're put in are still like a running thing that I don't know if this film had that much influence on stories like that, but it is one that can be put in to this running narrative where you can make a point by creating this fantastical environment that would not really happen, but it allows you to visualize an otherwise kind of amorphous concept. Yeah,
Jonathan, so real quick, let's hit on this note, because we keep finding connections and stuff. Motorcycles. Yeah, no, motorcycles are here. Just the fact that there's uniform motorcycling, if that's a verb,
in Colonel Blimp.
At the start of Colonel Blimp, which is really cool. And two, there's an epic motorcycle rider / motorcycle crash that leads to death in A Matter of Life and Death. One character dies.
There's actually death in A Matter of Life.
I get it. Oh, yeah, there it is. Hey, we're figuring stuff out. These are deep, contextually rich films, people, that we're just going to keep getting stuff out of. But yes, anyway, there's definitely a motorcycle motif going on. There's not a motorcycle in Black Narcissus. There is a miniature donkey, which many people consider to be the motorcycle of the Himalayas. So there's that. But the motorcycle theme in the first two films,
as Bon Jovi said, my steel miniature donkey.
Yeah, exactly. Oh gosh. But yes, there's also a very important motorcycle crash at the start of Lawrence of Arabia. And
directed by David Lean.
Exactly. And I don't know if, like, now I'm wondering if Lawrence of Arabia, the real person, actually died in a motorcycle crash.
Yeah,
or
T.E.
if
Lawrence.
that was just like David Lean saw that thing his good buddies did in Matter of Life and Death and was like, oh, that's cool. Let me do that. Which is totally how it works. If you're wondering whether or not people steal from each other, yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a real thing. Yeah, so
Okay.
he did. We just looked it up. He did die. He did die in a motorcycle crash in real life. Lawrence of Arabia.
It just fits so perfectly.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Oh well, it's what it is. But yeah, I mean, definitely the cinematography, the feel of it feels very similar to something to what the P&P boys, the Archers, did in their films. So I'm not going to go out on a limb and say they're completely unconnected, because I think they are connected, at least subconsciously.
Yeah. It just happens that it was actually a real thing that also serves the story and history.
I also wanted to get to two other fun facts that I had for this film that I wanted to point out. One was that...
fun facts with Alex.
There's an awful lot of freezing in this movie. Whenever Peter sees his conductor 71 appear to him, time freezes, and there's an awful lot of freezing in the climax.
They just used
sequence.
After Effects with rotoscoping, right, Alex?
No, people stood really still. And there's a lot of camera trickery if you look in their cuts and such to make sure that you could, when possible, freeze frame shots to show that people were standing still, so they didn't have to stand super still. Although there is a scene where the young woman and the doctor are playing ping pong together, for which they were trained by world champion ping pong players.
They were doing really well.
Yeah. They were pretty good ping pongers, I must say. That's one of those weird skills they must have picked up, and then for like the rest of their life, they were just like a little bit better than everybody else who they played ping pong with. And they were like, why are you so good at ping pong? Oh, I was trained by a world champion ping pong player. They must have been
For this movie that has nothing to do with ping pong.
They must have been real good at parties. Anyway, no, I think ping pong does have something to do with this movie, Jonathan.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it was just... I literally, whenever they started playing ping pong, I was like, oh man, they're just going to freeze it. They just want to freeze that ball in the air. I know it.
Yeah, they did freeze it. And it was frozen, put the ball in the air, which is pretty impressive. It's fun to look at. And it's another little added layer of fantasy that Powell and Pressburger love to put in their movies. But I feel like besides just being interesting visually, I think it's important to note that ping pong is, it's a competition. And I think this scene in which Peter, that specific scene where Conductor 71 appears to Peter, is the one in which Peter learns he's going to have to pick someone to defend him.
Yeah,
he's literally being issued the challenge in that scene to defend himself in a court of not law but reason, I guess, or they literally get into that law of justice. And one of the people who's going to defend him,
they call it a couple things.
Yeah, the one of the people who's going to defend him is the one currently engaged in the competition of ping pong.
Right.
Maybe that's much ado about a ping pong ball, but it's there.
There it is.
Yeah. One more fun fact. On the beach scene in which Peter discovers that he thinks he's dead. He's not really dead, but he wakes up on a beach. It's a really pretty beach, and there's some goats and like a little naked boy playing the pan flute, which is just very strange. Why is a little naked boy?
I feel like the last time we had a naked child in one of these movies was Yvonne's Childhood. That was a while ago.
Probably. That was a while ago. But yeah, for that scene to get the kind of cloudy, hazy, is this real or is this real life or is this just a fantasy effect? The DP actually just breathed on the lens for a filter. He just kind of fogged it up and called it good. I love that. I always love that. You always think that it's all about like making, finding really good equipment, knowing how to use that really good equipment, when it's really about problem solving. And sometimes your problem is solved by breathing on a lens.
But the interesting thing is that a lot of DPs will tell you not to do that. Don't do that because, well, specifically in terms of wiping your lens off, like if you're just going to breathe on it and then wipe it off, because that will like wipe off a lot of the protective coating that is on the lens. So he's also taking a chance with that. But he got the shot, and he's doing it for Powell and Pressburger. So
he did several
do what you got to do.
Powell and Pressburger. I believe he did Black Narcissus.
Well, there we go. But before we get into Black Narcissus, we should talk about Raymond Massey, who is the American defendant for The Otherworld. And because we haven't talked about any of the Britain smackdown that went on during the court, which I thought was hilarious because he made some really good points coming from a movie that's from Britain. They did not go easy on England in this movie.
No, not at all. They fought each other back and forth pretty good. They had, which I think I really respect that they were able to not be. I mean, they're two very British filmmakers, but they have a sense of humor about it, you know?
Right.
Also,
right.
like one's an immigrant, so they have an outside perspective on being British.
Yeah, that's true. I just thought it was really funny because there wasn't a lot like the whole argument from the other guy's side was about love. It wasn't like an ad hominem attack against America. There was a little bit of that with like the pop music of the day, but there was a lot of attacks against British imperialism and stuff like that that we've talked about on the podcast before. And it's played by Raymond Massey, who we've seen before as Jonathan in Arsenic and Old Lace, the guy who looks like Boris Karloff. So that was fun. Also, to hear him not using a transatlantic accent threw me off a little bit, more than I expected to.
Yeah. All right, on to the next movie.
Black Narcissus from 1947. In a remote part of the Himalayas, high on a mountain, far away from any large civilization, sits an abandoned palace now owned by the Catholic Church. An ambitious nun running from a past failed romance, Sister Claudia is given her first assignment as a sister superior to turn that palace into a proper convent. She is given a ragtag assortment of nuns to assist her in doing so, including the unstable Sister Ruth. The nuns are assisted by the blunt Mr. Dean, the local British agent who provides some temptation for the celibate nuns, especially Claudia and Ruth. The nuns start a school for the local children, but are routinely flabbergasted by the differences in the local culture, including a silent holy man on a hill and a young prince who runs away with a local village girl. The entire atmosphere seems completely in contrast to the restrained way the nuns live. Will they hold firm in their beliefs, give way to the seduction of the situation, or snap under the pressure?
All right, so this movie, as you set up for us at the beginning, Alex, is so specifically colored. Like the themes that are running through this movie are portrayed a lot through color. And the first color that really stands out and carries us through the entire movie is white. The nuns are obviously wearing these white habit outfits. They're not actually totally white. They're a little bit off-white. I think they were described as kind of an oatmeal color. But all of the nuns' faces are like, they had to have been like extra whitened because they are so pale in this movie. It's kind of freaky a little bit.
They bleached their actresses before shooting.
Right. But it's kind of the point because this film builds a lot of suspense and conflict within the nuns, and obviously the major theme of asceticism throughout the movie, like kind of draining them of all color, makes the color stand out even more as we start to pump it into the film later on, as they start to be confronted with various temptations and desires and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's and it comes at the perfect time for it when color starts to become a bigger thing, and the use of color becomes more and more meaningful. Not just, hey, look, it's in color now, but
Right.
hey, look, we can use this to create a more artful world and a more entertaining one at that. I feel like the color in this movie makes it both more valuable as an entertainment piece because it's more gorgeous, and more meaningful as an art piece because they do a lot of theme work with it to really make make the erotic nun movie work. I said it. That's how this movie is described, and that's kind of what it is. It's not like there's any and to clarify, it's not like it's a sexploitation film. It's not like it's a
This is
porno
not
or
graphic
anything.
at all. It's all subliminal.
It's all about the desire, the seduction, the temptation, the contrast between control and giving into that temptation all throughout the film. And it's beautifully done, and all the tension's really, really good. It's a very enjoyable movie to watch that you feel like you've gotten something out of by the end, and also you're like, wow, that was really dramatic.
Yeah. And the second color that has a really huge impact in the movie is red, specifically for Sister Ruth. The first time that we see Sister Ruth, she is not seen at the original convent that we start the movie in, where we get like the basically the baseball lineup of characters. But the first time that we do see her at the new convent, she comes in covered in blood. And so she has red staining her white habit from the very first frame that we see her. And she's going to be the one that struggles the most with this temptation, with her love for Dean. And then by the end of the film, whenever that has come to a head and we're getting to the climax, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, but even so, this movie is definitely about the journey. She has exchanged her habit for this red dress, and there's a scene, there's basically a standoff between her and Sister Claudia, where she's sitting down looking into her compact and putting on this really red lipstick, while Sister Claudia, in all white, is reading her Bible, which has red edges and stuff like that. So it's kind of this showdown of ideas.
Oh man,
and
the way the red pops out against the white is so good.
Oh yeah, which makes it so dramatic. And it's amazing how they shoot the red, especially of the dress. In certain scenes in shadow, the dress looks black. And then only when the light hits it right can you see that it's this dark maroon red. And then also the second color that is a little bit less obviously thematic, but is blue. And they're constantly talking about how the atmosphere is having an effect on them, and the clear air. And clear air obviously is generally portrayed as blue. The matte paintings in the film have some really beautiful blue skies, and just the normal blue sky on the location that they're shooting at. And then there's also a room in the convent that is blue, and it has a lot of these pictures from the old king or whoever lived there and had his harem there. And there's a lot of conflict happens in that room, but also there's a scene where the village girl that the young prince runs away with is in there by herself, and she starts dancing, and she starts having all of these imaginations, and she meets the prince there too, or kind of, I guess she runs away, but that room kind of is symbolic of that clear air that kind of gets into their soul and starts making some of the nuns like plant flowers instead of vegetables, and just start to kind of go after the beauty and these temptations of things that as aesthetics they are not supposed to be following.
The tension between beauty and practicality, all that stuff. Oh man, it's such a contextually rich movie. You could sit there and break down each and every scene and be like, in this shot, this color is shifting this power from this character to that color, and the shadow is doing this, and the sound is doing this, and the light is doing this, and the angle is doing this, and oh man, it's so deep.
Yeah.
You could just talk about it all the time. But Also, we try to keep this podcast under 2 hours for your listening enjoyment. So we won't do that. But this is it's all there. If that's something that appeals to you, then you know, go right for it. I'm tempted to do it myself, but it would take way too long. But that's not to say that this isn't a fun movie to watch and enjoy. It's fun to see, these nuns try to fit in this place they don't belong. It's fun to see the crazy characters of the locality, whether it be the British agent, who is a bit of an ass, but also incredibly practical.
Okay, I want to throw this out real quick because I just realized this while we were talking through some of these movies, but the relationship between Dean and Sister Claudia, and really just kind of his dynamic with the nuns in general, brought me back to the African Queen, where we have a very similar dynamic between the rough and gruff man and the pious woman, and they both have to kind of, calm down or loosen up, respectively.
Yeah. It makes sense. That's a good comparison. Yeah, we also have, I don't know if we've gotten through all the characters, but there's we don't see a lot of the general who he's a warlord. We don't see a lot of the warlord who grants this land to the nuns, but we do see a lot of his nephew, the young general, who is torn between learning a bunch and using the benefits of the nuns to advance himself in life, and just kind of giving into his own desires, as he does eventually, running off with the young village girl, who is played by Gene Simmons, of all people, which, there's the whole whitewashing discussion, which we've been over and over. Probably didn't need to cast Gene Simmons here. It's a role that I don't even know has any lines, but that's just, I don't know. There's something about seeing Gene Simmons pop up here, like a very young Gene Simmons, is very interesting to me. Yeah,
it probably would have been not very difficult to find an ethnically correct actress for that particular role,
right?
Because, like you said, there's not a lot of lines. It's all kind of physicality that the character is portrayed through.
Like they weren't selling this movie on Gene Simmons' name. Like, not to say that any of those reasons are good reasons to whitewash a role, but I'm just saying those are the traditional reasons for doing it. Like, this one just baffles me, but it's just, I don't know. It's weird. It's there. Go check it out if you're interested. So yeah. Let's also talk about some behind the scenes drama, Jonathan.
All right, go for it, Alex.
So in the climax of this movie, Kathleen Byron is trying to push Deborah Kerr off of a cliff. And this is a scene that was directed by...
We're talking about actresses' names now.
Yes. This is a movie that is directed by Michael Powell of the Powell and Pressburger. He did most of the directing, as we've already talked about. So he's directing the scene. He was currently dating Kathleen Byron, and he used to date Deborah Kerr. So that must have been a whole lot of fun. He actually remarked on the tension on the set, to which I can say... Yeah, of course. What did you think was going to happen, man? Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's not, especially when you're making a movie about desires and stuff like that. It's probably not the greatest choice.
Yeah, and like having a director who's dated one or more of the actresses on set is not necessarily uncommon, especially in the earlier part of the 20th century. But to have one try to murder the other one in a scene makes it a little weird. And I don't know if there's any bad blood, but I'm sure it was all like a conscious thought for all three of them at some point during the day.
Yeah, you can't really be making a movie about suppressing desires versus giving in to desires when you have dated the director and are now acting against his current love interest. But yeah, one of the things I want to talk about is that the themes in this movie are so rich, like we've been talking about. There's a lot of sexual tension. There's a lot of suspense as we start to realize how unhinged Sister Ruth is. And I love how restrained this movie is. Like we've been saying, this is not exploitative at all. There is no promiscuity or anything like explicitly shown in the film. It's all done through colors and through dialogue and just the different things that are being brought up. Like the young prince brings out his handkerchief, which has perfume on it, and Sister Claudia is like smells it and is like, what is that? He's like, oh, I have this handkerchief with Black Narcissus. It's a perfume that the sailors are trading, and stuff like that, which actually is a real perfume. And yeah, it is the name of the title, and this is the only time that it comes up. But it's that idea of this permeation of beauty and extravagance, I guess, that kind of gets under your skin and changes the way that you look at things, whether it's to a more subtle extent of planting flowers when you're supposed to be planting potatoes, or to a more dramatic extent of trying to push someone off the cliff because the man that you love loves her instead of you. So it's really refreshing to watch a movie that can take such charged themes and portray them so subtly and so subtextually. I feel like if this movie were made again today, it would just be way too blatant and obvious, and it would just lose all of the charm that the movie has, because whether it's because of relaxed censorship laws or whatever, there's so much that could be made way more exciting than it is in this movie.
Yeah. And of course, this is what Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger were going for. They were going for something that was relevant to the times. Thinking 1940s, thinking repressed sexual tension, it tracks. It makes sense. It fits.
Yeah. And I was actually wondering this week during a couple of these movies, like, I don't actually know what the state of censorship in the UK was during the Hays Code, because I know these were made during the American Hays Code, but those rules didn't necessarily apply in England. And yet, like I said, this film has a lot of that subtlety to it that American films would have when they're trying to address issues like that. Hence the Wall of Jericho in It Happened One Night.
Just the off the top of my head, it was only like 2, 3, 4 decades ago that it was finally allowed for on British TV for married couples to have one bed in a TV show rather than two. So I'm guessing they had pretty strict censorship laws.
Yeah. So I assume there's an analog to some extent. I just don't know exactly what it is.
I'm not as brushed up on it. Oh, yes. I missed this earlier, but I should have circled it back around. But again, both Powell and Pressburger are very artsy fellows, and they did love their music as well. In fact, they would go on to make a film that was an entire opera, but done with unique and fun camera angles, and that Powell and Pressburger production design, crazy fantasy touch that is actually all choreographed to music. But this scene, too, the one where the nuns are trying to push each other off the cliff, or one's trying to push the other off the cliff, it was blocked or essentially choreographed to a piece of music, and then later on, the person who scored that scene was given that piece of music and then kind of made his own. So kind of
it was like a temp music like before it was cool.
Early form of temp music happening here, temp score, along with a completely choreographed scene, which is pretty interesting.
That is really interesting, given the kind of controversy around temp music over the last year or two. Imagine someone finding out that you're literally adjusting your blocking to temp music that's going to be changed later for people who are upset that people use temp music just to score a film.
Angry.
All right, so let's move on into overall notes and talk about the lasting legacy of the two giants of Emeric Pressburger and Michael Powell.
Yeah, certainly. So, of course, it's sad that they aren't as well known today as it feels like they deserve. I was about to say as they used to be, but it wasn't like they used to be very well known either. They always kind of flew a bit under the radar. It's not like they were ever large commercial darlings of the general public. They were always kind of artsy, kind of in that art house era. But because of that, they appeal to the people who like to make movies, like to think about movies, like to study movies. And a lot of those people, especially of the film brat generation, went on to be super duper popular. One of Scorsese's favorite films of all time is The Red Shoes, which is a Powell and Pressburger film, very musical. In fact, it's based on a ballet. I feel like, Jonathan, are all of the scenes in that film sung? They don't all sing. There's straight dialogue.
No,
in there.
there's straight dialogue.
There's straight dialogue in there. Okay.
That is, if I'm not mistaken, that's the first one of their films that either of us saw, right?
I think so.
And we watched it together, and we're both just like stunned by how beautiful it was.
We're like, wow, that was great. I need to watch more of this guy, and of course these guys. My bad. And of course, they have a lot. They have 24 movies, and each one is so contextually rich, and it feels like you've watched an entire season of a really good TV show every single time you watch a Powell and Pressburger movie.
And then Michael Powell goes on to direct a lot more movies on his own, and I believe Pressburger did too, or at least writing and being involved in films.
Yeah, they all had their
apart from their creative partnership.
Yeah, they all had their own independent projects going at the same time. They were busy guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, we've already talked about the fact that Lean, he edited two of their early movies and would clearly take a lot of influence from them. Scorsese vocally was mentored by Powell, who gave him a lot of help. In fact, gave him some recommendations on Mean Streets. We talked about that in the Scorsese episode a couple episodes back. And there are, that entire generation, looking back, was definitely influenced by Powell and Pressburger. To one extent or another, if you look at a Lean film, there's a lot of clear visual and story elements that are connected one-to-one very well between the two films. But if you look at a Scorsese film, it doesn't really look like a Powell and Pressburger film at all.
It doesn't feel as clean and theatrical as them.
It's definitely edgier. But the use of art, the referentialism, the fact that at least his main characters, we had a very long in-depth conversation about this, but at least his main characters tend to be very complex, fleshed out people. That shows through his filmmaking, even down to Scorsese's use of color, where you can feel that there is a very strong color palette for each of his films. And he would openly, Powell directly mentored him. They would openly view, screen, discuss, give notes on films that Scorsese was working on, at least throughout the early part of Scorsese's career. So there's a clear marked influence in his films as well. And I'm sure many, many others. And, many more to come. Those of us who like to go back and value older movies and the techniques that came before and see where the modern directors who influence us now got their influences and trace it all back and gather it all up and make the best of it.
Yeah. And the other thing to talk about with Powell and Pressburger is the context that they were making movies in, which is England. And these films are so steeped in British culture, especially the first two, to the point where in The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, there is an extended dialogue sequence about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and how Candy is actually a friend of Conan Doyle, and then they talk about the next chapter of Hound of the Baskervilles, which is being printed in the Strand at the time the movie is coming out, or at the time that the movie is set.
He asks for spoilers.
I know he does. He asked him so did he say what's going to happen? He's like, oh, yep, there's another murder, but it's not Sir Henry. He's like, oh, thank goodness. And it literally was just like someone today being like, hey, are you caught up on Stranger Things yet? Or something like that. It's so interesting just to see how England is not that different of a culture from America compared to most other countries, but there's just certain little things in them that is really interesting. And then in A Matter of Life and Death, you literally have basically an America versus England showdown, where they're like bringing out the worst in each other and then having to defend themselves.
Yeah. And it should be noted, and I found this actually as a comment by one of the, I think Michael Powell, who pointed out that, for instance, on the life of Colonel Blimp, Pressburger was a Hungarian immigrant, and, this person and that person on the crew in like major positions were from different countries throughout Europe, different places in the world. So the context within they were making movies was a varied view on what it was like to be British in the 1940s, which I think contributes to their ability to both be really proud of being British and also like being very self-aware and being able to kind of poke a lot of fun at themselves. I mean, just look at the mustaches in Colonel Blimp. Really think about it.
Right.
Like, there's that one guy wandering around the first part of the first flashback who has a mustache that looked like it exploded on his face. Do you know what I'm talking about, Jonathan?
Yeah, because I was thinking about that guy. Because we're starting this movie, we're taking the cartoonish old man and going to give him a story and humanize him. And then the first thing that we see in the beginning of this humanization is another cartoonish old man with an even more ridiculous mustache.
Yeah, right. I think they're trying to give it context for like, this is the mustache of the times. It's just what he has.
Right. Yeah, the fact that they even have to excuse the mustache just like speaks volumes about British mustaches.
Yeah. And of course, we've already talked about the fact that this is there's a lot of very specific use of color. And in fact, this is, when Technicolor is really starting to get big, starting to become a possibility for films. This is when stuff like, Black Narcissus won Best Cinematography for color cinematography. This is when that category starts to become a thing in the 1940s. And you can tell even Powell and Pressburger over the course of their films, just today's from the Life and Death of Colonel Blimp to Black Narcissus, the use of their color becomes much more mature, much more thoughtful, much more precise, much more, like how we consider use of color today. And so it's interesting to see the development of color in their work.
Right. It was almost gimmicky in A Matter of Life and Death. And then in Black Narcissus, it's like carrying all of the themes. So yeah, it's really cool to see that progression. And the other thing that I'm always amazed when we watch some of these older movies that are shot in 4:3 aspect ratio, and how beautiful that aspect ratio can be, because nowadays full screen is kind of seen as this archaic form, and it's like old TV, and the only real way to shoot a film is in 2.35 to 1 cinematic aspect ratio. But these more square frames can still give really nice compositions and amazing cinematography. I remember noticing that in Akira Kurosawa, and here we're seeing it again in English language film.
Yeah, I mean that's the aspect ratio that film pretty much started off in, or it became the standard pretty quickly after film started off, I should say. And that's what people learned in, that's what people had to play in and got really good at over the course of 30, 40, 50 years of using that aspect ratio. So by the time you get to the 1940s, 1950s, you have people who have a long tradition of shooting 4:3 to pull from and are very good at it, which is always fantastic to see. And in fact, reading old interviews with cinematographers from the day, some of them would hate widescreen when it came about. They didn't know what to do with all that extra space in a frame. And of course, nowadays we think of like 16:9 as being like the minimum. Anything less,
and now
we
even
don't
that's
know what
starting
to
to feel blocky.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. It has more to do with what you're used to than what is objectively better. But certainly the trend does seem to be towards wider and wider screens.
Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. But I guess the other thing that runs through all these movies is matte paintings, which we don't talk about too much. But when we're talking about directors who are very precise with their art direction and very conscious of what is in their frames and what colors they are and all that kind of stuff, matte paintings are perfect for that kind of direction because it's literally, if you're building a set, you can have this huge backdrop that is hand painted by artists to be whatever you want it to be. So there's some beautiful shots in Black Narcissus of a sunset over a mountain, and all the colors are going from this deep red where the sun is setting up to this really dark black or blue, and it's near the climax when Sister Ruth is kind of giving in to all these urges that have been building up. These movies are just really great examples of how to use matte paintings and how they can add a beauty and a theatricality to your films.
Yeah,
but matte paintings have kind of fallen by the wayside these days. They were used a lot in kind of American New Wave and like 60s and 70s movies just before the CG revolution happened, and now it's just all green screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of plates and shit. Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, there's pluses and minuses to both.
Right. But at this point, there's not even there's not both out there. There's only green screen.
That's true. Nobody really uses a matte painting anymore. In fact, a matte painting would probably be more expensive than using VFX at this point. And plus, it's just so standard. Like, it's baked into all your workflows. Yeah. That's unfortunate. All right, guys. So we've nerded out about Powell and Pressburger for quite some time now, and those are just 3 of his movies. There are 3. I keep saying his. I'm so used to just doing one director.
Right.
But yeah, this is a duo with a long-lasting influence on a lot of filmmakers.
I mean, even just so much influence on David Lean, who had so much influence on every director that came after him.
Yeah, I was just about
it's
to
a
say,
ripple
it's
effect.
a transient property. It's something that can go from one director to the next, to the next, to the next. And that's all of film history. And that might be why it's worth studying. You might find a hint of something that you like in a modern day director that if you go back, you can find in a less distilled version and really enjoy it even more. Whether that be enhanced theatricality, Wes Anderson, or use of color, or all sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're a fan of directors like Wes Anderson or Quentin Tarantino, I guarantee you there is very little in those films that is not pulled to some extent from a director that went before. And so studying these older directors kind of brings you closer to the inspiration for some of the great modern movies that we're still seeing today.
Yeah. And of course, as we said, there's like 24 of these things. So go check them out. They're very worthwhile. Some of them are hard to find. But some of them...
Filmstruck has several. YouTube has at least A Matter of Life and Death.
Probably some more. They're around. There might be worth some scrounging, but if a lot of people start looking for them, they'll probably become more available. So yeah, Powell and Pressburger, everybody, check them out. If you're a fan of the directing capacity of 2 directors like the Coen brothers, check them out. If you like color, check them out. All that stuff. But Jonathan, what are we talking about next week?
All right, so next time we have run a poll on our Twitter account, and you have spoken. We wanted to have a little bit of fun, do a little bit of a light episode, so we pitted robots and monsters against themselves. No, we're not going to do Pacific Rim. Sorry, maybe we'll do a genre-bending episode later on. But robots have won the poll. So the movies that we're going to be talking about that kind of go through different incarnations and different approaches to how to portray robotic main characters or primary characters in a film are The Terminator from 1984, The Iron Giant from 1999, which is on Netflix, and Ex Machina from 2014, which is also on Netflix as of fairly recently. So you can get a head start on those just on Netflix, and we will meet you back next time to see what we can learn from robots in film.
Did you know the word robot means slave?
Yes, I do, Alex. Well,
that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And I'm at the Blue Jay 1994.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya.
Yeah, no, this is a legitimate point. This should be kept in the podcast. I also realized that my whining kind of sounded like Jerry Seinfeld there.
It did.
It should be kept
Why
in the podcast.
are we talking about this on the podcast?